Hi, everyone. Welcome to Perennia's fifth webinar of the Preparing for Retail Success series, provided to you by our Agri-Food Funding Program. Today's topic will be pricing for profit. This is the second of a three-part series. The first part actually happened last year, and I will put a link to the recording of that in the chat. My name is Emily Page, and I'm a food scientist with Perennia Food and Agriculture. We offer a wide array of services to support Nova Scotia's agriculture and seafood sectors, such as food safety, agricultural extension, mobile wine bottling, and analytical testing of cannabis, foods, and beverages. At the Perennia Food and Beverage Innovation Center, we work with clients on product development, process improvement, nutritional labeling, and shelf life determination. Our guest presenter today is Gary Morton of Morton Horticultural Associates. Gary has worked in agriculture for 40 years, helping farms and food businesses across Canada find new value, success, and profit from what they do. Lastly, just the Zoom housekeeping notes. If you have a question during the session, please use the Q&A button, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. And with that, I will pass it off to you, Gary.
Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see everyone here. And today I'd like to take a little bit deeper dive into pricing than we did last year. And that's the purpose of this exercise. Pricing is one of the hardest but most important things for a business to do. And this is how I started off the last webinar as well, because it's so important. If the price is too low, people don't take you serious. If it's too high, maybe they're going to pass and they're not going to buy your product. I mean, if it's too high, they may think you're gouging them as well. It's really kind of like the three bears and Goldilocks. You're trying to find a price that's not too high, it's not too low, it's just right for that target customer. So I hope what I'm sharing with you today is going to help you find that right price for your product. We use price to capture a product's value, and that's significantly what's happening here. Is you're putting a price on a product, there's a value that you're offering with that product, and you're targeting it to a particular group of customers. Price reflects the value being delivered. Price also is used to frame the customer's product, the customer and the product perception. So it kind of links and aligns that customer product perception for you. And it also defines profitability. Sorry about that. Because if your prices, as I said, are too low, another thing that could happen is that you just don't make enough money to operate your business properly. So there's a lot of factors that we're going to explore here today. I'm going to go through some things in the beginning, just some background ideas about pricing and some concepts, and then we'll get into some numbers a little bit as we get going farther here, with some real examples that you can look at. The questions that really come to mind when we start to talk about pricing are how to get setting prices right. And I'm sure that's what you're really concerned about here. You're probably also concerned, will the customer pay what price I put on my product? And those are all really valid points that you need to be looking at for your products. And how much will they pay? And these are all questions that when we're pricing products, we have a challenge. And I've been in business for probably 40 years, and of those 40 years, the first 12 to 15 I spent in the retail wholesale industry, and pricing was a huge issue, and it's always a big challenge to figure out. How much will they pay? How much do you need for them to pay? How much do you need to get for your products? And those are all points that I hope to explore with you today and give you some examples so that you can understand this a little bit better and help you manage pricing. I'd like to start off with some mentor advice that I've got from a mentor back in my retail days. And it was very simple. It's buy low and sell high. And when you think about that, it seems a simple statement, but lots of times people just don't really follow through on it all the time because they get carried away with different aspects or thinking that they have to compete people that they don't necessarily need to compete with, and they don't understand their customers well enough. Buy low and sell high. We'll just keep that in the back of our mind as we're going through things today. Another mentor I met in Australia years ago, back in the 80s, was Deborah Law, and she was Australia's fuchsia lady. She sold fuchsias, which is hard to say, but she has since that time, that nursery has become one of the largest nurseries in Australia. But she gave me the advice of, she said, I never discount my price. I'll discount my service. I'll do a bonus offer. I'll add value in some way, but I never discount my price, because she said back then, if I lower my price, then they will come to expect that they can get a discount. And I don't want to devalue my product. So these are all just some points, I think, from these mentors to keep in mind as we're going forward. So what are the factors influencing your price? One of the factors is you got to think about what's going on in the world. And your world is not necessarily the world. I use an example here of, if you sell your products into a grocery store, do you go into the grocery store often and just see what's going on? Do you see what people are doing? Do you see who's picking up the product? Do you see who's putting it down and going and picking up a competing product? Do you get the opportunity to ask those people why? Those are some of the things in marketing and understanding pricing that you need to do. You have to remember that your world is not necessarily the world. And sometimes we get very narrow in thinking because we get focused on producing products in our own little world. We need to expand that. The same apple in different prices. If we look at the 4 apples that are on the screen here, one apple sells for 10 cents. On the other end, it sells for $2.95. So we're having the same apple, but there's different prices. So I guess arguably we could say on the left-hand side at 10 cents a pound, that apple's going to juice. And it may not be the same quality of apple, but it may be just you have excess production that it has to go there. The apple that's going for 12 cents may be going to processing because it's a little bit higher value. The apple that's at 60 cents may be going to a storage system and being held and manufactured and value added a little bit and going off to a retail system. And then $2.95 is what the consumer, or $2.99 is what the consumer maybe is prepared to pay. So if you're selling direct to the consumer, you get $2.99. If you're selling to maybe a co-op or something like that, you might get 60 cents a pound. If you're selling to a processor, maybe it's 12. If you're selling to juice, it's 10 cents. So there's lots of different prices that are going on with all the products that are out there in the marketplace. There's also the market functions from field to fork. For example, there's from the farm gate to the consumer. And if we take apples again, and if we said at the farm gate, you're getting 50 cents a pound, then there's a storage and processor that does a function that there's a cost for doing that. There's a distributor function that there's a cost for getting the products to market. There's a retail function, which is to get the product from basically you or the distributor to the consumer. And there's a cost at all those different levels, and they just all add up to the total price. So in this example, you can see that the farm gate is about 17% of the consumer price. The storage is about 33%, the distribution about 10%, the retailer about 40%. So if you're looking at where you're going to fit in this whole chain, are you going to do some of these functions, because that'll allow you to capture some more of the value and it'll impact the price that you're charging. How does the competition price? And this is really important to explore. There's lots of ways that you can do it. There's, basically store visits, or look at the app Flip, where you can see the sales and things that are going on. You can compare your price to other competition out there. But it's important to know what the competition is doing so that your product is not priced out of the market completely. But there's also concern where you're trying to mirror the competition's price. And I've never seen two businesses that have the same costs. Their prices could be totally different. do you know that that competition really knows what their price is? Now, if we're talking large corporations, maybe they have a lot of resources to be able to figure it out. Smaller businesses may not have the same opportunity. And if you're trying to base your price on what some other people are selling their product for, it could be an issue. They may not have the same value offer as you do. So you don't want to just blindly mirror someone else's price or look at that price and say, well, I got to be a little bit higher, a little bit lower. Because where the lowest price was the law, and I'll use the example of Zellers, it was a discount grocery chain that was, or not, merchandise chain that was around for a long time. And it suffered in the end from trying to be the lowest price against the big players, the other big box stores that were out there. So you can't be the lowest price, and that's not where I'm suggesting you look at all. I've seen too many people over the years tell me that they're going to be the lowest price, and they never stick around when they're doing that. You don't want to be the lowest price. It's a death spiral down. You need to be thinking of some of the other ways that you can up your price. You also need to look at where you make money. And if you have multiple products, you probably have more than one in many cases. And this is the concept that Boston Consulting Group uses, is that there's cash cows, there's rising stars, there's question products, and there's dogs. So your cash cows are your ones that pretty much work automatically. They've been proven in the market. They make you money. And you don't want to go messing around the price or messing around with that formula too much, because it's consistently making you money. Now, rising stars, on the other hand, are ones that are probably going to take a lot more investment. And you're going to have to think about how you're going to price these products, and can you turn some of those products into cash cows at some point. There's also question marks that these are products that you're just really not sure of. You've had them going for a while, you're not sure if they're making enough money, you're not sure maybe where the price is in the market for those, and you're working to adjust that. And then dogs are products that unfortunately sometimes you've had them for a long time. Dogs are kind of lovable and you don't want to get rid of them in lots of cases, but maybe you're not making enough money from some of those, so you have to re-examine the pricing of those. But collectively, what you're looking at is, does the price of all these products that you have work for your business? So who is the target customer? I'm not going to go into this a whole lot, because some of the other webinars we've talked about this, and I know Daryl Monroe talked about this in the past webinar on branding. But who is the target customer? The more you understand the customer, the better it's going to be for you to manage your pricing. You're going to know the limits of what they're prepared to spend, the kinds of things that they're going to buy, and it'll help you with your pricing strategy. What's that target customer thinking? Are they thinking that they're looking for value? Are they looking for a high-end product? Are they looking for quality? Are they looking for really good service? Are they resistant to price, or is price not really the big factor for them? Is value the big factor? So they're all things you need to be considering here. Price relevant to target market. And I learned this years ago when I was working in Winnipeg back in the 80s. And one of our clients was Palliser Furniture. And the first time I remember going into their showroom, and I'm looking at the prices and I'm going, wow, these are really cheap prices on these sofas that they've got in here. And in the end, I realized that this was the warehouse for the dealers, and these weren't the prices that the consumer pays, and that there is a whole chain, as I was mentioning earlier, to get that product to the consumer, and the price is going to change and vary as you're going forward. Another Chesterfield example I have is that one of our clients, we had a number of fairly wealthy clients, and I remember visiting one client one time, and they owned a chain of retail stores. And I remember leaning on the couch and getting scolded by the lady that was the owner of the house there. And she said, you're leaning on a $20,000 Naugahyde couch from Italy. And it made me realize that I could never think about spending $20,000 on a couch. But there's people that do. And This is part of when you're looking at pricing, is thinking about the relevance to the market that you're trying to target. Are you targeting the discount people? Are you targeting people that, price is not necessarily an issue? Is there an image part of this? What's the value that's connected to this? So there's so many aspects to price here. And packaging size is another one that people compare, balance with pricing. They'll change the packaging size to maybe match the pricing that will fit in a particular market, or it could be the volume of product that they have that they need to move. For example, there'd be times of the year when the small package is almost the same price as the big package when somebody wants to move inventory. And you all probably have seen this with toilet paper in the marketplace. There's the changes in the size and of the product so that they can put a price that is connecting with the consumer. And if you're like me, you're probably get confused as much as anybody when we start to look at some of these products and the offers that are made and comparing them, and is this a good value? And that's how people can use some of the prices and the products to influence the buying habits. There's also the cost of inventory that I think you need to be aware of when we're pricing. Sometimes people overlook this, that if you're holding products for a long period of time, there's a cost to that, and that has to be built into the price as well. And I know it probably shows up in your overhead a little bit, but if you're holding inventory for a long time, or you have to bring inventory back and those kind of things, those are all aspects of your cost of production here. And cost of production is really critical when we're looking at this. What does it cost you to produce your product compared to maybe other people? In all the years that I've been working, I've never seen two businesses, even though they're very similar, with the same cost of production. Some people will have different mortgages, they'll have different investments, they'll have different equipment, they'll have different labor costs. And those things are the reasons why some people can charge less for their products and some people can charge more. And you need to understand this for your business very well. So you need to keep really good records, and you need to know how things are moving along. Efficiency and lean, you've got to try to be as lean as possible, keep those costs down, because you can die by a lot of cuts in your business if you're leaking in lots of places. So those are all going to influence your price. Cash flowing the sales and pricing. And I think this is an important point here I want to make, is that there's a cost to making your product. You have to buy your input supplies, your labor, you have to invest into things. There's the overhead, you've got to pay your rent, your bills, and all those things. And you typically have to pay those in less than 30 days, or 30 days or less. And you're building up an inventory, as we mentioned earlier. But there's also marketing costs, and you have to invest into promotion and getting your sales and getting your products out to the stores. So that there's a timeline here from when you bring products in, you manufacture them, and you're able to market them. Then you've got to distribute them out to the market, and you may have to pay someone, a distributor, and they may want terms of 30 days. Then you're going to get that product to your customer, and the terms there may be 30 or 90 days. And depending on the customer, that could start to be a long period of time. It could be a couple months, or it could be 3 or 4 months, as we're talking about here. And then if the customer reorders in between, there's some costs of financing and cash flowing all this. So sometimes people overlook the cost of what these influences are going to be on your pricing. If you have to cash flow your product for a long period of time, it's going to influence the pricing. Positioning your product in the market. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if you've got low quality products and low price products, or high quality products and high price products, I mean, not everybody's going to be in that A position up there where there are high price products and high quality products, or you probably don't want to be down in the low quality, low price products where the F is. You're going to try to find some sweet spot where you're fitting in the middle that works for your business. The product marketing mix. So for example, when you're entering the market, if you took existing products to existing markets, there's low risk. So the price is probably going to be low. But as you move up and you take new products to new markets, the risk gets higher. So in between, the price is probably going to creep up. And because your risk is higher, you need to get a higher return to manage that risk. And also the market entry exit risks that are here. So you have low exit risk and low entry risk. So it's easy to get in and out. So, the price is probably going to be fairly low if you're playing in that market. But as you move up to this purple area up here, where the high entry risk and high exit risk, so it costs a lot to get in and it costs a lot to get out. There's a lot of risk in that area. So you're going to need to have higher prices to compensate for that. So I'm going to just take a quick break here and ask if there's any questions to this point. Emily, I don't know if anybody has any.
No questions yet. We do have one comment that says, could not agree with this more. It does not benefit anyone to keep undercutting one another because at some point you are selling at a loss. Yes,
and I think that's probably one of the overlying factors I'd like to make sure that people get here is this isn't a race to the bottom. It's not about trying to have the lowest cost. It's not about going in the grocery store and if you're selling food and just look at what the price is and saying, well, I got to be below that. No, you probably have to be higher than that, because when you're playing with giants, as you saw with Zellers even, they couldn't compete on the lowest price when you're getting in with these large corporations. And you don't really want to, because who wants to have to work all as hard as you're going to work to do this and have no money left in the end? You really want to, I'd rather that, you're selling less products and making more money. And I think you'll find that you'll have a much better life out of that one, for sure. So I'm going to dive into some of these other points here that, because it'll take a little bit longer to explain. And I'll try to go slower on these points that are talking about some calculations a little bit more. Pricing is more than a numbers game. Lots of times we just think about, oh, it's a markup, the cost plus pricing model, which is typically how most people think. We have hard cost production and a marketing, then we add a profit markup, and that kind of comes up with their selling price. But the problem with that is that you're possibly leaving opportunity on the table, and you're not really often capturing the full value that you're bringing to the table or to the market or to the customer here. So if we go through this diagram and we look at the cost of production in black on the left, there's the cost of marketing and sales, you have cost of distribution. If you do a profit markup, as you saw in the previous slide, and you're creating your price to the consumer, the risk that you have is that the consumer may pay more. They may pay more for value, and you may be leaving money on the table. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to introduce value offers so you can increase that price to the consumer. And the more value opportunity and offers that you can make, and I hope I show that in a little bit more as we go on, then theoretically the higher the price your customer might accept. So when we're talking value, you get paid when you bring value to the marketplace. The consumer's looking for value, they're looking for solutions to things. Price, well, lots of times we think about price first. That's not the first thing that the consumer's thinking about. And I hope to show you that a little bit more as we move along here. I want to point out these things first. They're going to help us with the examples that we're using. I want to make sure everybody understands fixed costs are costs independent of your sales volume. So for example, if you pay rent or you have equipment loans or insurance or management salaries, those are things that, if you're not producing something, you still have to pay these things. These are what are called your fixed costs. Your variable costs vary with the sales volume that you're producing or the production volume that you have. And those would be your inputs and your direct labor and your utilities. I want to discuss like the break-even sales point. And the break-even sales point is the units you have to sell to break even. So the formula for that is you take your total fixed costs, which are those costs that I just described there, like the things like your rents and your loan payments and your management salaries and the costs that you have to pay no matter what. In this model where this is anticipating that you're going to sell your product for a certain price. And then we're going to subtract that variable cost from that. And that's going to tell us the number of units that we need to sell to break even. And break even is the point where you're covering all your fixed costs. You still haven't made a profit yet, but that's the point, the number of units that you need to reach at a particular price. So the example I'm going to use here is using, there's two examples here, total fixed cost of $150,000 and total fixed cost of $100,000. Now I'm just using this as an example, but it could vary considerably in different businesses. It could be a lot less, it could be a lot more for some people. But when you start to add in your cost of rent and your salaries and those kind of things, it can quickly add up. Your variable cost per unit, cost of goods per unit, in this case, example is $285. And those costs are things like your bottle, if you're making jam or jelly or juice, and your product cost and your direct labor to those and other input costs. And in this example, they total up to $285. The production volume is units produced, and I'm assuming that the selling price is $6. Now, I know these are a little hard to see maybe, and the font, but I'll try to go through them slowly so you can catch it. The first example is break-even sales point, the BESP. And if we use $150,000 as that a fixed cost, and then we take the $6 as the selling price, and then we minus the $285, which is your variable cost per unit, that means that you have to sell 47,619 units to break even with that overhead. So let's move down and say, okay, the next one, if we reduce those variable costs, those are the costs of making the product, the inputs that are going in. If you were able to get a better deal on buying your blueberries, for example, if the price dropped and you're saving 30 cents. At $150,000, you're going to divide it by the $150,000 by the $6 of the price that you're selling your product for, minus the variable cost. It means that there's 42,857 units that you have to sell to reach that break-even point. That's not the point where you're making a profit yet, but you're covering all your fixed costs for the year. Now, if we took this and we reduced your fixed cost by 50,000 to 100,000, we can see the impact. And now we're going to divide that 100,000 by the $6 minus the 285 originally. Now you only have to produce 31,746 units to reach that break-even point. Now, if we went down to the next level and we said, okay, we've got $100,000 fixed costs, but we're also reducing those variable costs, you can see that it's 28,985 units that you need to do to break even. So pricing is pretty important when you're starting to look at this, to understand your costs, to manage your variable costs, manage your fixed costs, and in this case, you already had your selling price in place. But you can play with this and it'll tell you the number of units that you have to produce so that you can actually reach that break-even point. Now, there's break-even sales price. If we take the total fixed cost, and then the break-even sales price is that, let's assume we want to know the price that we actually need to charge based on the number of units that we're going to sell. So we take the total fixed costs and we divide it by that production volume, and then we add in the variable cost per unit, and that gives us this break-even sales price. Now, these are hard to see a little bit, so I hope they're not too confusing, but I color-coded them so we can explain them a little bit better. In the black example, we're using 1,000 units are being produced. The blue is 5,000 units. The green is 10,000 units. In the yellow is 15,000 units. In the pink is 20,000, and the purple is 25,000. So we're going to go through this example with $150,000 fixed cost, and we're going to produce 1,000 units. And if we add in that variable cost per unit of $285 that we were using in the other examples, that means that our products are going to have to sell for $152, and we have to sell 1,000 of them at $152.85 if we're going to break even at that $150,000 fixed cost. And you can see as we go through these different examples, at 5,000 units, you're going to need to sell if you're going to sell 5,000 units, you're going to need to sell the product at $32.85. If it's 10,000 units, it's going to be $17.85. If it's 15,000 units, now you can see it's coming down. My products can sell for $12.85. If it's 20,000 units, $10.35. And now at 25,000 units, if we sold 25,000 units at $8.85, we would break even. So we can see this can help us, by playing with this, it can help us figure out where the price needs to be or where it could be. And it's a great little tool to play back and forth with. And you should be looking at it all the time and monitoring in your business. Now, if we reduce the fixed costs from 150,000 down to 100,000, you can see, I'll just go back for a sec. At 150,000, it was 152.85 per unit. If we reduce the fixed cost to $100,000 at 1,000 units being produced, now we only have to sell those at $102.85 a unit, which is probably way out of the bounds of what you're looking at. But you can see from this that there's volume is tied to the price. So you need to be able to match your price and your volume to get to probably where you need to be in the marketplace. Now, if we go all the way down to the break-even sales price at 25,000 units, you can see now it's down to $8.85 per unit. So that's the point. If you sold 25,000 units at $6.85 a unit, you'd break even. Now, just to give you a bit of an example here of tying it down to your business, if we had 1,000 units on the black box we're looking at right now, and we sold them for $102.85, we would have to sell 19.2 units a week to be able to reach that break even. And as you can see, going down to the purple one on the other side, at 25,000 units in this example at $6.85, we would have to sell 480 units a week throughout the whole year to be able to reach our break even. So it gives you an idea of the volumes that you have to produce, but it also, how much every week we have to be selling. And then if we use the example here, and I'm just going to go down to the purple one over here, for example, but at 25,000 units and we're selling at $6.65 per unit, that means that we have to sell 840 products a week, or units of product a week. And if a grocery store, for example, was selling 1 case a week, that's 12 in a case. And that's assuming that that's probably enough to keep them interested in having your product on the shelf. That would mean that you'd need 40 stores selling a case a week and under that model. So you can see, if you look through all these different numbers or units here, that you go from 1.6 stores to 8 stores to 16 stores. As your price comes down and your units go up, it can be a tool that you can use to figure out how many customers you actually need, or how many stores you need to have your product in. There's another thing that's important when you're looking at pricing is pricing barriers, or points of buyer resistance. And in this diagram, you're going to see major price barriers and minor price barriers, and a price point range you should be at. So a major price barrier, for example, is $1 when you're looking at the retail world. And you can see why the dollar store kind of operates under this realm. And most products in the dollar store are between $1 and $5 is really where they are, because they know that those are price barriers for people. Once you go over $5, there's less interest in maybe buying the products the same way. So once you pass, how these price barriers work, once you pass $1, there's not that much resistance till you get to $5 again, and then $10 and $15. So it helps you when you're figuring out your price for your product. The minor price barriers are in between. That means that, once I go past $1, then the consumer I can probably go right up to $1.50 and with little resistance, or I could go up to, from there I could go up to $2 where there's little resistance. And over on the other side, you can see, if I'm going to price my product at $1, then the range I can kind of go is $0.95 to $1.25, and the consumer is probably fairly comfortable with that. But once I go over, say, $1.25, I probably can go right up to $1.45 with little resistance from the consumer. So it helps you when you're looking at the concept of pricing. Charm pricing is, and left digit price principle are a couple other things I'd like to mention here. Lots of times you'll hear people say, well, you can't price your product with 3 nines like you see here, or at $10, the consumer's going to resist that, or it psychologically doesn't work. But there's really been no research that really has proven this, and you'll find that for a long time, a lot of people would price things at $9.95. Well, a friend of mine has a large nursery business in Ontario, and he followed that. Somebody had told him one time, well, you can't price your products at $9.99. The consumer doesn't want to do it. It'll influence your sales and all those kind of things. And so he had everything priced at $9.95. And then after a while, he got thinking, well, this is kind of stupid. Like, I don't think the customer's that price sensitive. So he moved all his prices back up to $9.99. For example, or not all $9.99, but to the 99 cents. From the 95 cents, he went up to the 99 cents. And he made an extra $30,000 that year just from that one moving the price up. So part of this is about understanding what the consumer will pay. $10 maybe is a barrier. $9.99, lots of times people think that's $9 versus 10, but it's really $10. That kind of falls into the left digit principle. For example, if you sell your product for $4.99 and you plan that you'll be discounting it often for $3.99, you might be better at pricing it for $5 and discounting it for $3.99, because there's a bigger difference between the 5 and the 3 than there is in the 4 and the 3. And these are perceptions that all I'm pointing out is you need to play with those a little bit just to see what your customers are thinking. But you'll hear different people say different things, but in my mind, in lots of places now, they've just totally removed all the digits behind, and they just go straight with, this is $10. What happens when I discount my price? Well, this is an example that you can look at. If your present margin is 50% in gross margin, I just pulled these as an examples here, but you reduce your price by 10%, that means to produce the same profit, your sales volume has to increase by 25%. So you have to be very careful when you discount things that you're getting increased sales. If you're going to discount something, you want increased volume out of it. So in this example, if you drop your price by 10% and your gross margin is 50%, then you have to do 25% more in sales to make the same profit. What happens if I raise my prices? If you raise your price, if your gross margin is still 50% and you raise your price by 10%, then your sales could decline by 17% before your gross profit starts to reduce. So what this means is basically I'm selling less, but I'm making more. So I'm doing less work. I'm selling less product potentially, but I'm probably putting more dollars in my pocket. So these are all factors that you want to consider when you're pricing your products. Ben Franklin said the best way to increase your financial position is to increase your income while at the same time reducing your costs. Let's have a look at this. Here's an example where we're looking at, if we take that current situation, we have 100 products at $2 per unit, it equals $200 in sales. Our costs are 100 products are $1.90 per unit, or $190. The profit is $10. That's 200 minus 190. If we look at doubling our sales, so that means we have 200 products, 400 in sales. We have, going down the middle column here, now our costs are $380 for 200 products, and our profits are $20. So you've doubled your sales and you've doubled your profit. So you've sold twice as many products, you've done a lot more work to do that. You've reduced your costs now. If we reduce your cost by 5%, so we're going back to that 100 products again, $2 per unit, $200 in sales. So we have 100 units at, if we reduce our cost from 190 to 180, it's approximately That's approximately 5%. So that's $180 in sales. So if I reduce my cost by 5%, now I'm also making $20 profit. So in the middle example of doubling your sales, I had to double my sales to make $20 profit. But I also, if I could have just reduced my cost by 5%, I would have made the same amount of profit. So let's look in the next example. We have that current situation again, and we go through that first column, and we go down the sales and the cost and the profit, and we have $10 profit in the end. Now, if I increase my price by 5%, now those 100 products are $2.10 per unit. That's $210 in sales. I've got 100 products at $1.90 per unit, which is $190 in cost. $210 in sales minus $190 in costs equals $20 in profit. If I increase my price and reduce my costs at the same time, so if I increase my price to $210 per unit, that's $210 in sales. I've got reduced my cost by 5%. So now my unit cost is $180 in total. And I've got $210 in sales minus $180. And now I've got $30 in profit. So it's important all the time when we're looking at pricing to look at how much can we increase our price, how much can we reduce our costs, and how much can we grow our sales. And it all impacts the profit that we're going to have in the end. And these examples are in the handouts that, so don't worry too much about writing them down, and the handouts that will come with this webinar. A cynic is a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And that's by Oscar Wilde, the playwright. Intrinsic value, and we're going to look at a couple of values here quickly. But intrinsic value is the value that something costs. A turnip is a turnip. No matter how much you polish it and shine it up and dream about it or whatever, you're probably not going to want to pay a lot more than what the standard going cost is for a turnip. But perceived value is the value that people will pay for products. Now, if we look at a sports car like this, few people can actually drive this car to its full performance. Unless we lived in Germany and lived on the Autobahn, we wouldn't be able to drive it at anywhere near that speed. And in most cases, yet people still buy this product because there's a perceived value for them with it. So this is where we're kind of moving with your price as well. If we look at the products, you could on the screen here, you can see the Big A water, and I picked it because I know the artesian well that it comes from, and oil and water both come from holes in the ground. Probably we're both looking at it as essential things, but it doesn't take that much to put water in a bottle, and it sells for $1.29 a liter. We can get it free out of our tap in lots of cases. And gasoline, and this is a high test gas just recently, $1.25. So, you know, water, people will pay more for things, you know, based on the perceived value. If you thought about the water, this is probably one of the cheapest waters that, you know, per liter that's out there. If you're looking at the Fuji water, it's probably over $3. So people will pay more for value, or what they perceive as value. The value progression and pricing, as we move up this model here, down at the bottom is commodity, and that's really where you have high volumes at low margins. As you differentiate those products, you can get more value in your pricing. As you add value, you're getting more value in your pricing. And as you get to that point where you add that experience to it as well, then you can get the highest price for your product. And this is where the dollars are in things today. You know, down at the commodity level, you, again, like I said, you have to move large volumes to be able to make your products work for you in most cases. And the customer resistance to price, like if we look at this model across the top, we have product value to the customer. Down the side, we have resistance to price. Basically, at the commodity level, if you increase the price, there's going to be resistance from the consumer. As you differentiate, there's less resistance. As you add value, there's less resistance. As you add experiential experiences and really connect with the consumer, then there's less resistance to the price as well, and you can charge higher values. So at the bottom in the commodity, you're stuck really, you know, fighting over with other people about price. As you move up, you're separating yourself in the marketplace. Your perception of product value is usually much lower than your customers, and I think that's really important to consider. The story is important to tell. This is Slingsby Gin, but it's in the North Yorkshire spa town of Harrogate. There's a well there though in the 1600s they found that had properties that everybody comes, and it's world famous, that aquifer. So they make this gin out of the waters that are there, but they build experience in. They build recipes and unique packaging and the master distiller and all these kind of things in newsletters, and they tell people, and they can create more value for their product because they're telling a story, and story has a big influence on the price that you can charge as well. Pricing tips and strategies. I'm just going to leave you with these as we're wrapping up. It's important to get the value offer on the table before talking price. If you put price on the table first, you're going to have resistance. And think about this when you're selling, you're going to buy a car. They rarely tell you the price until they've told you everything about the car, the value, the benefits, the features, all those offers. And then they get down to talking the price because they hope at that point that you're so in love with that car that you're going to pay that price. So it's important to get your value offer on the table before talking price, because then price becomes just the only thing people think about. Setting price for the customer, not the product. And if we just look at that product and we take those costs and we mark it up to a price, we lose the opportunity of what that customer may pay. We may leave dollars on the table. So it's important to understand our customer and what they are prepared to pay. Know what our customer wants. That helps you know what they're prepared to pay. Understanding how they think, all those kind of things. And I'm not going to go into that too much in detail because other webinars have done that here. Know how much, knowing how much what they want and how much they will pay, and are there enough of them out there that will buy your product at that price. But it's important to test your price. I think one of the greatest tools we have are farmers markets and things, where you can go and test prices with people in different farmers markets and see the reactions and help you figure out what's needed. You also need to keep really good records and know your cost of production. If you don't know your cost of production, it's going to be very difficult for you to get your pricing right and to be able to know all those factors so that your overhead costs, your fixed costs, and your variable costs that are right, so that you can do your break-even projections and to get your pricing right for what you need for your business. Your unique selling proposition and your unique value proposition, again, I won't go into these because we have in the past, but those are important because those are the things that connect your products with the consumer, and they really influence the prices as well. You also have to look at, are you giving away too much for free? Like, what are you doing in your business that maybe you shouldn't be doing or you should be charging for? And, monitor those things as well. Again, know the competition, what they're doing, but don't mirror what they're doing exactly. Do your own thing, use theirs as information. And then review pricing strategies often. I'd like you to just really recap about some of the things that we have talked about here today. It's been important to look at some of these factors that influence the pricing and keep those in mind when you're trying to figure out pricing, as we dove a little bit deeper into pricing here today. But it's also important to think about the numbers and the value that you're offering. Look at your break-even point. How many products do you have to sell? What do you need to get for your product to break even? What's the value that I'm offering that maybe allow me to charge more for my product than I might otherwise? And also remember that people buy with their heart first. And this is where the value comes in and the connections. This is where probably the most successful products that are sold out there, they've sold people on a reason to buy their product before they've ever got to the price. And then people will validate with logic and then price finally. And if you've won their heart over and they can validate that this is a good value for the price that's being paid, then that's where the sales occur. now we have time for some more questions. I know that was a quick trip through this for everybody, and I know some of those numbers are a little bit complicated, but most of that is all in the handouts that you have and you can review. And I'm always open at the email below if you want to send me an email and ask me another question to go a little deeper. Emily.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, there are handouts that I will send after this webinar that have a lot of the details of today's session. If you do have a question though, we do have a few more minutes here and feel free to put it in the Q&A button. We do have a question already waiting, Gary, which I believe was on the slide where you were talking about the $9.95 versus $97 and
Sure.
And it says, where did he get the major and minor price? Is there any psychological paper on it?
I can go back to that if we want. Okay. If we look at this is the one that I got this table. I've seen this table in many different reiterations over the years, but this one's from John Stanley's book, Just About Everything a Retail Manager Needs to Know. It was written in 1999. And this is what they were looking for? Yeah. Basically, there's just been a lot of research over the years to see that these are different barriers for the consumer as they're spending their money. And it probably changes a little bit over the years. But I haven't seen any new tables come out by anybody. But I do know that, if you go to the dollar store, for example, the dollar is kind of what people have in their mind, and there's a limit to where people will go. And these barriers, it means that after I spend $1, then maybe I'm prepared. A major price barrier is I'm pretty easy to spend anything up to $5, and then I have to think about it again. And then once I go over $5, I have to think about it if I'm going to go to 10. And if I go over 15, I have to think about it. But these mid barriers in there are important to think about as well. For example, the minor barrier between 5 and 10 is $8. So if you look over on the pricing range, it says if you want to sell a product for $8, you can go from basically $7.95 to $8.25. But what that also means is that I probably would be, if I was trying to sell my product, for example, for $6.75, I'm leaving money on the table. I probably could go up to almost $8 and get little resistance, or I should be trying that to see if I could go there. And this is what these price barriers help you figure out. And they're just really as guides that you could use here, but they are based on research. And I've seen these tables for a long time.
Thanks. There's no other questions at this time. So if you do have a question, please submit it. But we do have a couple of comments here I want to read.
Sure.
Which this one here from Joel is, you can never hear this message enough. I know that people often want the magic formula for pricing their products, but there isn't one. And the reality is it's an art based on many variables. Either way, vital to know one's numbers, margins, and to have a sense of where the products fit into the competitive marketplace. If this isn't difficult enough, the right price is ever changing as all of those variables evolve and shift. And I think it's a really good point.
Yes, and thank you, Joel. That was a really great point. And I should point out that the next week's webinar, number 3, we're going to see Peter Chapman go into pricing at retail a little bit deeper. So if you have questions that go beyond what we talked about today, then Peter may cover those as well. And I think you could look at some of the information that we have today as a foundation for what to take you forward in grow your pricing strategies would be.
Yep, absolutely. And in the first session, we went a bit more into margins and markups, I believe, Gary. And
right.
That's the link for that is in the chat. And Peter is going to go more into detail on the retail side of things next week, and that registration link is also in the chat. So be sure to sign up and get more information on this, because it's definitely an important topic. That's why we're going through part 3 on it. Part 1 was not enough last year.
Well, it's interesting when you get a pricing, like, I mean, we could have multiple webinars on pricing and just go down into each one of these factors into a lot more detail, because there's a lot of information here. And some of these concepts people have to think about for a while before they kind of get a handle of them. But, you know, my experience has been, like, in pricing over the years, is that it's a challenge. Like, it always is a challenge, but the more you know your costs, the more you understand your customer, what they want and what they're prepared, what they're looking for and what they value the most, then the easier it becomes to price. And a lot of the times it comes with experience. You'll see the people that know what people will pay, because they understand that. But I think another important thing is that your product isn't for everybody. And the more you understand who your product's for, then the easier it is to price for that group of people.
Absolutely. There's another comment here that Simon Sinek has a TED Talk about starting with why, which is building the relationship before even talking about the what you're selling.
Yeah, and it's definitely, and Simon has some really good books on the subject. And, you know, these are all, if we start with thinking about, we tend to always think about the product. We tend to think about what that product is. Instead, if we go back and start to think about why we're even producing this product, who are we producing this product for, how are we going to produce it, then that starts to lead to what we produce. And then that also gives you information to price your products as well.
Just one question here before we wrap up, which is, with the younger generation, are these price barriers changing? I ask because it appears sometimes that they would pay more.
I think they probably will pay more for some of these things. When you look at the price barriers, I think they're more as guides. And if I go back and think about, you know, it changes over time too. Like, I mean, what you could buy for $1 when I was a kid is pretty different from what you can buy for $1 today. But they're really talking about resistance. And once you get over a certain point, where is the resistance? I still think that there's a resistance at $5 probably, and to go to 10, and then from 10 to 20. And there's probably even more resistance as you start to go a little bit higher on some of these things. But it's to understand your customers, what they want. Use this information as a guide. I find it important that maybe people look at things and think about, well, that point I made, for example, about, you know, if I'm looking at pricing my product between $5 and $10, and $8 seems like it's a good price to be at, I don't want to be maybe pricing my product at $6.75 or $6.25 or $6.50, because the customer will just as soon pay, you know, that $8 as they will the $6.50 for that product. So those are all things that, this is always an ongoing experience, as I think Joel had mentioned there. It's always changing, it's always dynamic. You got to be looking at it, you got to be monitoring it, and it will change over time. And there's so many different cohorts of consumers out there now too, because, as you said, the millennials and all these different generations, they think about things a little bit different, and maybe price isn't as much of an issue. My main point of all this would be, don't get in a price war trying to go to the lowest price. Look at all the ways you can improve your price, increase your price, because you do need to make money to run your business, to give yourself a good living, to put away for retirement, and to build your business so that you can pass it on or sell it to somebody in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome.
This was part 2 again. So Gary did part 1 with us last year. That YouTube link's in the chat, but I will send it in my email this afternoon with today's handouts. And next week we will be with Peter Chapman, going more into the retail sales side of things. So be sure to join us next week. And with that, it's 1 o'clock. So thanks everybody for coming, and we will see you next week.
Thank you very much, folks, and look forward to seeing you sometime in the future here. And feel free to email, as I mentioned, if you have any questions.
Thanks, Gary.